Yep.
All right.
Sent to a third party streaming on YouTube. Hi, YouTube.
So I must have to pay for this thing. Hi, YouTube people, where I'm an idiot having technical difficulties. And there's a disturbing picture of me at the beginning of this YouTube video that needs to change. So hopefully, hopefully that happens. I know people don't know what the hell I'm talking about here, but welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast on YouTube. And we're about to go live on Zoom as well, recording on Zoom, that is. But let me tweet this out for the people that aren't on this YouTube channel. Most people are used to the other YouTube channel where it pops up live whenever we go live. This will not be on that. Professionals here, Scott. This is a professional podcast. All right. There we go. Now it's been tweeted, and I'm going to hit record. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
One, two, three. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. I am 57. I'm Rob Howe. I'm a technically inept, and those listening to the podcast don't know what I'm talking about, but the YouTube channel on my Google account just disappeared last week. The Hawk Fanatic YouTube channel, where we usually live stream these. So now we're on my personal account here because I can't figure out where the Hawk Fanatic YouTube page went. So I may have to recreate a new one or something like that. But anyway, we are live. We are yapping. It is 9:23 a.m. Central Time on Friday, July the 16th. Joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic, as always, who is fresh off the Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. He drove back last night, but is ready to talk to you this morning about what he learned down there and how much construction was there in Illinois?
Well, I probably ran through. I tried to count and I lost count. Like how many times that there were, 55 miles an hour and there were orange cones or barrels out there. I mean, it was
How
probably.
deflating is it when you get through one of those and then like 5 miles of, oh, here we go, more construction. That's so
It's
deflating.
it's soul crushing, Rob.
I
It's
know.
just you're like, especially when you're driving from Indianapolis to Iowa City. It's already about if you're lucky, you're like in the 5.5 hour range. If most of the time it could, but that stretches it. You're just like, I just want to get back, and then all of a sudden, 55, and then photo and hands. So you're like, dang it. And then some of the stretches, they have it and then they don't, there's nothing there. But anyway, I digress. 74 is a disaster. As always, it is every year. It's the orange cone state. In fact, last year I joked to Josh Whitman from Illinois. I said, if you and Iowa ever put together traveling trophies, just be one big orange barrel, and he laughed. He's like, yes, absolutely. I said, the confluence of 80 and 88 and 74, voila, orange barrel.
And it's just not just 74. I can attest to it being
80 and 88. And
80 into Chicago, up into around Lake Michigan,
yeah.
same stuff. It's the summer, so you're getting hit with construction in Illinois. It happens in the winter, so if it's the
Yeah.
summer, you're getting it. But glad you made it back safely.
Thank you.
We'll have plenty to talk about today. We've got we'll also touch on, it's mostly football, Iowa football. Big Ten Media Day, I think, justifies that. There's really not a lot going on with basketball, and we hit that a lot last week before football, Big Ten football Media Day was in Indianapolis. We hit the basketball when they had press conferences earlier this month. So I think we're getting to that point, Scott, where it's going to be heavy football talk here. I believe Scott Starzik committed after we stopped recording last week, not long after. It wasn't right after, but keeping with the tradition of the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast with news breaking the later in the day that we podcast. Scott Starzik, kicker from Woodlands, Texas, 5-star number 1 ranked kicker from Coles, decided, hey, Hotspot's done. Let me commit. So he committed last Thursday. We haven't had a chance to talk about that. I don't want to call him a luxury, Scott, but it's not. This is a great get. It is. You get the number one kicker in the country. It's a great get, especially for a program that relies so heavily on special teams. But it's almost like, it is a luxury. They're loading up. They got Trip Woody, a walk on. They've got a guy that's already established that has another has eligibility left. I think they're just leaning into, we're good on special teams. We're going to collect as many good specialists as we can.
And Rob, today we're going to find out from the House case, and this is going to be official, that 105 will be the number for football.
Can you just, for people that don't know, can you just kind of go through what that means and what the repercussions are of this? Just for football. We could talk about the other sports because obviously it impacts everybody. I have friends who have kids committed in volleyball that are worried now.
Yeah, I mean, each school, they've changed it from scholarship limits to roster limits.
Right.
And so you can scholarship as many players as you want, the detail that you want, up to, and in football, it will be 105. And that means there will be not 106. The walk-ons are done. And for a place like Iowa, that could be, disturbing because it relies on walk-ons because, as we know, I mean, if you kind of compare recruiting to that of the NFL draft, that a lot of these third three-star guys that Iowa gets from even smaller towns within Iowa that they recruit versus the ones that they pick up as walk-ons, it's kind of like the difference in the NFL draft. It drafted a fifth rounder and then signed in a bunch of guys as undrafted free agents. And sometimes the undrafted free agents outperform the fifth rounders. And I think and that's kind of what we're talking about here a little bit. Well, when you have 105 scholarships that, max, and players max, you want to maximize them, right? Well, they're getting out and ahead of this to saying, if you're going to have to scholarship a kicker anyway, you might as well get the best freaking one in the country, right? Yep. and that's what they did. And yeah, they have, they have a really good one on campus, and Drew Stevens, kind of had a late slump, but is back and seemingly better. And then now you're going to go get the number one in the country, and you also have another one on campus that walked on. I would imagine that it might be tough for him to stick around long term, but you never know. Maybe he just says, "Hey, it's competition. Let's see what we can do," and and then he'll be on scholarship. Everybody can have a piece of the scholarship. Now, the one difference is that what they can do, and then they're trying to figure out, and there's not a lot of clarity yet, but they're expecting to get that clarity today, or at least some of it, is that you can partially scholarship these players now. You can have officially 85 scholarships, but divide 20 of them up among 40 players, kind of like you do with baseball or wrestling and all the other equivalency sports. So it's not going to be, and then there are other situations where we're not going to put you on full scholarship, but we will pay you the equivalent of a full scholarship. So then you can use those numbers where you're still at 85 scholarships, but the other 20 get an NIL component that, kind of like what we're looking at now where, you have NIL. So there's a lot of different ways that could be adjusted. So it's not just this hard cap that you absolutely have to. But as Beth Getz said yesterday or 2 days ago, that they remain committed to being the best they can be. And so she didn't come out and say it with numbers. They're going to pay the upload. They're going to pay as much as they can, and they're going to scholarship as much as they can, especially when it comes to football. And the other sports have different numbers, of course. Baseball up to 34, softball 25, volleyball 18. I didn't see what wrestling was, but men's basketball is 15. Women's basketball also is 15. Now there are some issues that I do want to know more about, and it hasn't been clear, and I didn't get more clarity even when I talked to Tony Petiti yesterday. Is will this allow for specific practice teams? Like the women have a male practice team. Can men's basketball have? In some ways they've had that before, like a gray team, right, that's not allowed to play or something like that. Will football have, a scout team type of thing that's, a practice team, for instance, that's just not going to be able to play. That
Beyond
I
the
do not know.
105?
Yeah. I don't know.
Could they do the
I don't
same
know.
roster?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
don't know
sure.
how hard is that 105? Is it just
Mhm.
like this is your roster?
Yeah.
We don't nobody else in the building.
Right. And I mean, is there going to be the ability for an injured reserve?
Yeah.
Let's say somebody tears an ACL in spring football. Um, are you SOL and you're down to 104, for the year, or can there be an injured reserve? Can there be, and of course that will be manipulated, as you can imagine. How many players will end up in injured reserve to bring in 15 other guys? So I don't know, but as of right now, it's a roster limit. So you cannot exceed that. Will there be wiggle room allowed? What's the last date that you can, pick and select or whatever? You have tryouts. I don't know. It brings up a lot of questions, though. But still, for Iowa specifically, they're at like what, 125, 130 this year. So they're going to have to do some cutting in the future, because you're not just going to automatically grandfather walk-ons year after year after year. They're going to have to produce, because you're going to want to bring in other players of that ilk. And then, in fact, how do they've done such a good job, Rob, over the years of getting the Quinn Schultes, of the Jake Gervais, of all these types of players that really aren't scholarship valued players. And then, they come and they earn it. Joe Evans may be at the top of the list over the last 20 years. I mean, 29 career sacks. I mean, that's incredible. Yet those players, where do they position in this? That's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and a lot of it, Scott, is accumulation, right? You bring in as many walk-ons as you can, and at the front end, you look at them and you're like, okay, these guys all have potential. These guys all, we're going to get them in here. We'll develop them. We'll see which guys pop. You have less of that now because you're not going to have those numbers. So on the front end, you're going to have to be a lot more accurate with your evaluations of these high school kids, because you don't have the numbers anymore to be able to pick through and watch the guys that do rise to the top. You're going to have, and then, so now those, 106 to 130 at Iowa, now they're at UNI or in the MAC or somewhere else. Now, do they get, so they go there, they're overlooked, they develop really well, right? And now they're Power 4 level kids.
Yeah.
So now the Power 4 level schools go and recruit them again from the FCS and the mid majors and things like that. Does that hurt the walk-ons that you're developing in your own program? Do you take one of them and say, listen, we appreciate what you're doing here, but we need the open scholarship. We're getting this guy from, Miami of Ohio or Northern Iowa. So it feels like this is a step along the way too, as well. Different point here, but it seems like the inevitability, Scott, of paying the players.
Oh, that's now going to happen. Today is going to be the day it's official.
So that gets factored in too with all this, with the scholarships. It's a complicated puzzle to me that's going to change. And we've seen it already, the landscape changing with the transfer portal and NIL, but it just seems like it's going to get more wild before it calms down.
Yeah, there's going to be all kinds of philosophical changes and things that each school is going to have to react in its best interests in a way that is going to be unique, frankly. When you look at teams in our neighborhood, Iowa, Wisconsin, Iowa State, Minnesota, Nebraska, they've relied heavily for generations on walk-on athletes. That here's our scholarships, here's our walk-ons. And, at Iowa, what ends up being the difference between Keegan Render and Kyler Schott? Well, one was projected, one got a scholarship. Kyler Schott was not projected. He didn't get a scholarship early, but they really had a comparable career. Now you can argue, well, maybe Kyler Schott was a little bit better or whatever. That's irrelevant. But the fact is that they ended up in a comparable place at the end,
Right.
but at the start they didn't. And now you're going to overlook a Kyler Schott who goes to, as you said, UNI, Upper Iowa, maybe a Division two, maybe even a Division III school, an NIA school, and develop. But it's going to be harder because then they're going to have a market, and you're going to have to be willing to pay for that.
And that's really the market on the front end too, right, Scott?
Yeah,
If Keegan Render has offers from, I don't remember what his, I
yeah,
remember covering his recruitment, but I don't remember his offers. But if he has offers from Iowa State, Nebraska, the schools you're talking
yeah,
about, our region, our footprint,
yeah.
and Kyler Schott doesn't, I mean, are you gonna take Kyler Schott over Keegan Render? I mean, that's some serious evaluation on the front end if you make
Mm-hmm.
that move.
And we look at the players that have had success, Rob, and in a lot of those situations, they have a common element, which is they have a physical impairment that has prevented them from being a major recruit.
Right.
It could be height, it could be weight. You look at Joe Evans. He was a quarterback. He was 6'2". His max is 245. It's like he's a tweener. And some of that's with the defensive linemen have come in and had success. Parker Hesse got a scholarship, but Sam Brings didn't.
He got one pretty late too.
Yeah.
So did Sean Byer got one late. Those were the days where you could see. I don't know if you can do that stuff anymore. Not as often.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa's made a killing off the Josie Jewels. He's going to go to Luther or he's going to go to Iowa. Well, now he's still in the NFL making pretty good money. But that's going to really be interesting for the evaluation and then how they split it up. And it may be a situation where they're going to fully fund 85 scholarships and maybe they're going to provide for 10 more that splits among 20 and say that's kind of our walk-on pool per se, or something. There's going to be all kinds of ways to work the system to where you can still find those players because it's been so successful for Iowa. But then you look at an Ohio State or Michigan or Alabama and Georgia, and they're going to say we can go get 20 more athletes. Now they will, and then they'll discard 20 more athletes per year because of that. And 20 more athletes are going to hit the transfer portal and go somewhere else. And so I look at this for Iowa as it's pretty smart. If you just stick to what you do and do well, there's no need to really get out of your lane. Do what you do well, be developmental, go get the guys that you feel fits you. And there's going to be such a flood from these players that exit Michigan, Georgia, wherever. Every single year they're going to cycle out because they're going to say, Jesus, I'm player number 104 at Georgia. I got a scholarship. I can't play, but I can go to, I can go to Missouri State, or I can go to Iowa, and then you can find those players. And likewise, the MAC schools will have that kind of ebb and flow as well. And Iowa's going to have its departures too, because there's players that just, it happens every year. There's players that don't play at Iowa, so go to UNI or whatever. So, but it's going to take a lot of smart recruiting at all stages. And if there's one thing that Iowa has done well over the years, Rob, especially the last 7, 8, 9 years, I think, is that they've really had a pretty good eye for talent and who fits. They're very self-aware. And I think overall that will help them if they maintain that philosophy, but tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the tweaks are. Iowa's been traditionally a program that waits to offer kids later in the process as some other schools. Will that still work in this new landscape? And there's really no way of knowing until you go through it, right? Till you experience, what does it mean to have 20 more scholarships? What do we do with those? How many kids stay in a given year, or take off? It's because there's going to be an uneven number. Usually there always are uneven numbers in recruiting classes, depending on needs and how many scholarships are open. But I could see more of a fluctuation. And I think this probably impacts high school kids more than anybody else because there are going to be fewer opportunities for them.
That's the sad part. And, and me and Jesse Temple, we've done two different confidentials, Chicago and Kansas City this year, where we combined to talk to 8 coaches in each of those markets. And all of them have been they hate what NIL has done to high school recruiting. And it's because that, like one coach told me, we used to, schools would come in and say we have 22 scholarships for freshmen. Now it's 12, and the rest are for transfers.
Yeah.
And so they're coming in with fewer numbers, and one who's very, very well respected and has sent some really good players to Iowa, I know, and then other schools too, by the way, told me, he's like, I got a handful of players that are 3-star capable. They're not ready to play now, but they're developmental prospects that in 3 years they could be really good, but nobody wants to touch them because they're worried that they're going to get fired if they don't scholarship them right away. So, or if they can't play and produce right away. So they figure at least a transfer could come in and compete. And if I got to wait on this kid, then I'm done. So that means it opens up for MAC, but the MAC are taking Power 5 or 4 transfers, but in the Kansas City area, they're saying, well, D2 and NAIA schools are just going, woohoo, we're loading up now. Yeah. And like this year, the running back from Northwest Missouri State is now going to Oregon.
Quarterback from New Hampshire's now at Minnesota.
Exactly, Max Brosmer. I mean, there's stories like that. I mean, up and down the Big Ten lineup. Receiver from Tufts, I think, is going to USC, so there's going to be more stories like that. And Iowa, of course, is going to compete in that world. And it always has, and it certainly always will. I mean, from a Charlie Jones to, just going out and getting the MAC kid that they couldn't scholarship at corner, and they're going to turn him into All-American, that maybe they'll do it, in their second or third year instead of their first year.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. And you're going to need a roster. Mm-hmm. Literally. You're going to need a roster every year because you're not going to know who's coming and going on your team unless you follow it, religiously during the offseason. There's going to be turnover, but hopefully the product remains good, and I think it will. I think that's heading in the right direction. The anticipation and excitement, Scott, for the 12-team playoff, people have been wanting this for years. It's here now. So I think the focus is going to start to turn to that after today's news comes out and people's kind of settle in and they've already come up with their plans. Beth knows what she's going to do. So just kind of implementing it. And as we said, you're going to have some flexibility because there are unknowns, and those guys get paid a lot of money to be able to figure this stuff out. And I'm looking forward to the season for the actual football on the field, and the race for these 12 spots, I think, is going to be fascinating. And I've been saying pretty consistently, and I think you've agreed with me on here and said the same, that I think Iowa is a playoff caliber team. What does that mean? Top 25, I would say, even beyond that. I mean, there are teams probably not ranked now that have a chance, that will go into the season unranked, that probably have a chance for that top 12. So I just think it keeps more people interested, right?
It's going to be so much better, Rob, for this sport, because the games that we've seen sometimes that have been, morganatic, 2 different levels of games. I mean, even in Iowa playing, like, let's say 10-1 Iowa versus, 5-6 Nebraska, something like that. Well, now the world's going to be watching. SEC teams are going to be watching, fan bases, ACC, Big Ten, of course, but also, Big 12, rooting for Nebraska to beat Iowa, so it could knock them down a peg, and then they're not going to be able to be in it. And take your pick on all the other games around the country. Everybody's going to be more connected that way. When it was only a 4-team playoff, I mean, those are the upper echelon teams, and they're still going to remain there. But I think for, you look around the periphery, teams 3 through 5 or 6 in the SEC, or 3 through 5 in the Big Ten, and 2 through 4 in the ACC and Big 12, they're all going to be in that logjam the last couple of weeks, and those games are going to be so important. I look at the final weekend here in this state. You have Nebraska at Iowa in primetime on Black Friday. I do think that Iowa's capable of having a team that's in that conversation at that point. Now, anything can happen, but I think as we speak here in late July, that they have a team capable of competing there. But then I also look at the game the next day, Kansas State at Iowa State. That also has, right now, as you look at it, I would bet more so than not that at least one of those teams will have a chance to get in the Big 12 championship game the following week. And that's going to have major, major ramifications. So overall, Rob, but those games before might not have really mattered, because even if that game between Kansas State and Iowa State, let's say they're both like one's 9-2 and the other's 8-3, and they're playing for a spot in the Big 12 championship game. So what? Maybe they go to a bowl game. One goes to a better bowl game than the other. One goes to the Alamo Bowl, or one goes to the Sugar Bowl if they win or something. I mean, that's a big deal to them, but it's not a big deal to everybody else. Now, the winner, if you're 10-2 and you go to the Big 12 championship game, and then people in Iowa are going, shoot, man, if Kansas State, we might root for Iowa State if they're 8-3 over Kansas State at 9-2, because Kansas State and Iowa might be competing for an at-large spot type of thing. So you've got all kinds of connectivity here that's really fascinating, and it's going to come down to the wire. And I'm going to be all into that for the last month. That's going to be part of my gig.
Yes, college football makes strange bedfellows. College football playoff can make for strange bedfellows. But let's take a break. It's a good time to take a break. We'll come back. We did a lot more macro stuff. We'll go micro into more Iowa. We'll go into the depth chart here and some things that we learned this week from Indianapolis and all that good stuff. But want to let you guys know that support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you so much to Systems Unlimited for the support of the podcast, and more importantly, the great work they've done in the community for over half a century. Let's hear from a few more of our sponsors, and Scott and I will be back on the other side. Hang tight. And we are back to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa City can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Scott, we have a depth chart. It's a preseason depth chart. Kirk likes to put these out and poo-poo them a little bit, but they're always interesting, and there is a reason behind them, too. It's not like there's no thought that goes into them. I think there is thought, and we have our thoughts on what goes into it sometimes. Seniority often takes precedent over a lot of things, but I think for me, the most interesting part of this is, starting with defense, just looking at it and saying, yeah, this is going to be good. This is going to be good again. That's what I took out of the defensive depth chart. Not that I didn't know that, but just looking at it again going, yeah, Aaron Graves is ready.
Yeah.
Yahweh Black is ready. Those two are going to be MFs in the middle of that defensive line.
Right.
I'm with you, though. I look at it and I look at, Herkett and Craig on the outside, and I'm like, can there be a pass rush from the outside? How much of that can come up the middle? to maybe compensate for the outside as those guys get acclimated. I don't know. We've talked about the defensive line. We've already previewed it, but I'm interested to see how it shakes out because you talked about Joe Evans. That's a big loss, and so is Logan Lee. Both of those guys were stalwarts.
Both of them are on NFL rosters right now, and Logan was drafted, and Logan is is a really important player. I look at Aaron Graves and Y.A. Black as two guys that could be one of the best tandems in the country inside, and I think this is Aaron Graves' year to kind of take that next step.
I agree.
He's been a good player, but he's still been really young. I mean, God, the kid played as a true freshman, rotating, and last year rotating, and he shows flashes, but now it's okay. It's Aaron Graves' time, and YA is a beast. I mean, if he stays healthy, this is his year to really dominate. And one of the things that I've grown to appreciate with Iowa's defense more and more over the years is when you look at their tackles, especially, that it's hard for them to generate a lot of statistics. The one that did was Davion, and Davion freelanced a lot, but he made a lot of plays too. But other than that, I mean, they are really disciplined and focused and tough and tenacious, and they may have only 2 tackles in a game and dominate the game, and people won't talk about it because it's just, well, you didn't only have 2 tackles. Well, yeah, but on every single play, he allowed Jay Higgins to make a tackle, which is why Jay had 171 of them. I am concerned a little bit about the edge because you got to have edge pressure. Is that Deontay Craig and Ethan Hurkett, can they make that step and go from being good to very good? I'm a little concerned with depth there. And I think it says something that they went 3 deep at each of those positions on their opening depth chart. I would say that, if you go 5, the 4 starters are pretty well set. I don't see anything disrupting that. But Jeremiah Pittman is probably number 5 among them just because of exposure and experience. And then Max Llewellyn probably 6th. And then from there, you're kind of projecting, Rob. You're saying Brian Allen, and, specifically, he looks the part. Now go take it. He's had good days in practice, and Kelvin said he's had bad days in practice. Go be consistent. Go make plays. You look at Caden Crawford, you're kind of next step. All right, now's your chance. Kenny Merriweather, okay, they need a pass rusher. Go be that pass rusher. Be what Chauncey Golston was early in his career, which is a rotational guy who could get after the quarterback and make plays. And then you look interior, Jeff Bowie has just had injury problems forever. Can you stay healthy and take that step? And then you have 2 walk-ons, Will Hubert and Luke Gaffney, who are still pretty young, and they fit that profile of the players we were talking about in the last segment, Rob. You come in a little bit of a detriment, a little bit too short, but they come in and you throw them out on the field. Can they do everything right and eat 10 to 15 snaps a game for you? That's all you need. You don't even really need to make a tackle. Just go do your job. If they can do that and find an edge rusher who succeeds, this defense will be one of the top 2 or 3 in the country this year.
Yeah, 12 guys listed defensive line on the depth chart. So that lets you know the competition should be stiff in training camp. More so the guys behind Black and Graves trying to position themselves to get into that rotation at defensive tackle, because I think Iowa is pretty committed to keeping guys fresh and continuing to rotate, but you got to earn your reps, right? You're not just going to get in there because they want a rotation. So we'll see how that all shakes out. The other interesting part for me, Scott, was the John Nestor movement from the spring depth chart. Not that we didn't kind of see that in the open spring practice, that he was emerging, but now it's on paper that he is one of the starting cornerbacks alongside Jamari Harris. But I expect those other guys to play too, TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee. I would think that they're going to get in as well, because I think, again, like the defensive line, Iowa's defense is pretty committed to being flexible and being able to adjust to whatever the offenses are doing. And against passing offenses, those guys are going to be needed.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a team that, you're going from a little bit of a position of weakness even a year ago because of lack of experience to one now that's a little bit stronger. Last year, a year ago, we talked, Jamari Harris was coming off a year-long injury. Then he had a 2-game suspension, and you're starting Deshaun Lee to open the season. For him, he only had Cooper DeJean, who is phenomenal, of course. But now TJ Hall played the year before. He was hurt last year. You look at John Nestor. He was a true freshman, played a lot of special teams. And now they have 4 guys you can look at and go, yeah, I think they'd be okay playing any of the 4 if needed. And whether it's injury or whether it's, sub package or whatever, I think they're all capable of doing that. And then you look at the next year, what happens. Like Nestor is also listed as the backup at Cash. Well, maybe next year when Jamari Harris is in an NFL training camp and Sebastian Castro is a draft pick and everything like that. Well, maybe Nestor's the Cash, and then maybe Lee and Hall are the starters. And so there's a lot of potential here with this, and you need those guys to grow up fast. And now they're at the position where they can grow up. And I like that. And I like the depth also, what we saw, at strong safety. I mean, Cohen, I think Kirk has kind of said that he's been injured a little bit this summer, but he should be ready for camp. I like, his effort on that play that he screwed up at the front end against Michigan, but his effort to go and chase down the guy was something that I think will live on way beyond his Iowa career. I mean, I'm sure every high school coach in America said, watch that guy, watch what he did. He didn't give up on the play. And then Zach Lutmer was kind of a spring sensation, if you will, there. So, seems like he kind of fits the part, in-state guy, goes out and earns a start.
There's a podcast on him, Prospect Podcast. If you want to get to know Zach a little better, go Google Zach Lutmer podcast, and you'll have a Prospect Podcast with my ugly face talking to him.
Is your beard just as white as it is now? I mean, you're looking like Santa these days.
So here's the thing for those that are watching and going, what's wrong with Hal? I usually have like these stages of the year where I let my grooming go.
Yeah.
And normally I usually get groomed before I go to the Big Ten football. I didn't do that this year. So now I'm just letting it go till Iowa Media Day. I'm going to see how long I can get the beard going and my hair. And it annoys my family too. So that's it.
You can have locks of love, for people like me who could use some hair and hair.
Fields of gray. Let's we don't need to go too much more into the linebackers are back, the safeties are back. There's depth chart, we touched on that a little bit, the defensive secondary a little bit, but let's switch over to the offensive side of the ball where more people are interested anyway, because they want to see what this new offense is going to look like with Tim Lester. What'd you think of the offensive depth chart, Scott? And did you get any feedback from Kirk on there? Any, specific questions asked of him of what we see here?
Yeah, he was probably more, he was asked more, and then he revealed more when it came to the depth chart on the offense, of course. And, first one you look at is wide receiver, right at the very top with Jarrett Bowie. And
I like the fact that they're playing 12 on offense. They've got 12 positions listed here. So that gives them a chance.
They could have played that last year, and they might have been close to that drive for 325, maybe, if we're
12 on 11.
It's 12 and 11, 12 on 11. Yeah, it might have given him a chance, but
anyway, wide receiver. I interrupted.
Yeah, he really is high, on Jarrett Bowie, and he's talking him up, and I was really kind of impressed by that, and thinks he can be a good story. Thinks he made some really good strides over the spring, and probably effused a little more praise than I would have expected, frankly. And Dayton Howard, he said he had the best, day of practice was his last one, and was just really impressed with what he was able to do as well. And, that was a surprise to me. He just really wasn't afraid to share his excitement, I think, for them. And then, he said he was pleasantly surprised with the unit. I mean, and that's weird because I'm like not that way. I'm thinking this team is like there's just nothing here right now. And Seth Anderson, he's like, well, injuries, but they should be fine. Caleb Brown, 1 game suspension, but that's it, at wide receiver. So it's not like he goes to Oklahoma State. He's not going to get any penalties. Um, and Caden Leach, and he didn't really talk about Caden very much, but at wide receiver, that was the one that stood out to me first, of course, just because Jarrett Bowie being out there, and I felt like that he's excited about them.
And we've talked about this, right, Scott? They need these young guys. They need to develop guys at this position. And if those guys are developing, it's a good sign.
And it's just always been the weird little like hangnail for this. I mean, it's you remember the movie Boomerang, Rob, back in the 90s? Yeah. And when Eddie Murphy's character dumped the woman because of her feet. Yeah. And then Martin Lawrence is like, you don't blank her feet, damn, I always cracks me up thinking about that. Well, it's kind of like that's the developmental eyesore of Iowa has been wide receiver. They've been the jacked up feet, because they just haven't done anything, and they've been so bad at it, and they're so good everywhere else. And it's like, God, you don't even have to be, Ohio State by any means. You just be Wisconsin or Minnesota at this area. Just get a couple of players out there who can catch 50, 60 passes a season and score some touchdowns and do some good things, and maybe get in an NFL training camp. And, because, as good as Brandon Smith was and Amir Smith-Marset, it still wasn't like they were all Big Ten caliber guys. They were they were good, but they weren't anything that you put in the Hall of Fame. So if they can get to that level with this unit, I think they're in good shape. But I think they're a long way from that too. And I think Seth Anderson, if he's healthy, will go a long way to taking steps forward there.
I don't think there were any changes on the offensive line, right? Was this the same as the spring?
It looks to be the case. He was asked about Bo Stevens. He's really excited about Bo. He thinks Bo's in a really good position. And one of the things he said is we have 7 players that he feels like they could start. He said that's like 3 or 4 more than what they felt like they had 2 years ago. And really, when you look at it, when you're saying Nick DeYoung, a guy who's in his 6th year, as a backup, and he's going to be the main swing guy. We know, tackle, maybe guard, whatever, and then Tyler Ellsbury, who will be center and then move to guard. And
it's nice having those 2 guys, right? Having DeYoung and Ellsbury, who have position flexibility.
Exactly, because the injuries have crushed this unit for so long, and God forbid that something would happen to one of the tackles for a game or two. And well, you do have Nick DeYoung there. I'm not saying that they're going to be great or perfect, but at least somebody who's played a lot of football. And so that was something he seemed excited about. And then the growth potential of the others, Cade Pieper came to mind, and, Trevor Lauk.
The hay bale toss.
Yeah. Champion. Yeah, exactly. And, and I guess he asked Dunk about him, he's like, so, did Cade break your record? And he's like, nope. So, and then there's Cade Bodrud, Cale Bodrud, is it Cale or Cade? I can't remember, but, he's a guy that, isn't on the depth chart, but obviously started last year, and they're going to start him out of guard. And, we'll see where he ends up. This could be, and one thing that's been pretty well established, it looks like, is unless you were here in spring football, except for Brendan Sullivan, you're not on the list. I mean, there's no Jacob Gill right now. There's no, Cade Bodrud, and so, and then of course people lost their minds a little bit over the Brendan Sullivan, Marco Lainez positioning on the depth chart, but
did you say Marco's last name right? I got admonished for that on Twitter last week.
Yeah. Did I say wrong?
I don't know. Let's just call him Marco.
Marco the third. Marco Polo. Marco the third. He's second team because he was there all spring. So what?
Sullivan wasn't here.
Yeah. And and that's a thing that people think like this is automatic, like this is how it's going to start the season. You got a full month of practice. It'll work its way out. But hey, people are excited. Jazz Patterson not being on there was a little interesting to me, and Aiden Hall is off the roster, by the way, for sure. He's gone.
He is okay.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing to me on the running backs is the spring depth chart just had LaShawn and Caleb on it.
Yep.
Now they added Kamari Moulton third and don't have Jazz on there. That is interesting to me.
They love Kamari. And when you look at the three skill sets, they're all different. And the thing is, Kamari last year, I looked at him as like an AAU point guard, just, because when he came in after that game early in the year I think he scored, but he ran a lot early. And it wasn't the Iowa State game, it was the game after that. And he just looked so young and small. And now he's up to almost 200 pounds. He's gained almost 30 pounds of muscle, and he's still quick. And if it's like, wow, this is, I remember when they recruited him and signed him, that it's just, to me, it's more like, okay, this is a surprise to me. This is somebody that I didn't expect to be in this position. I thought he was just, all right, we'll just grab this guy. No, they actually expect him to be really good. And I think with these three guys all have different skill sets that could really complement one another.
Did you get a sense at all? And I don't know if this it's tight end, so it's like people don't even concern themselves with it at Iowa. But who is the three guy behind Lachey and Estrenga? Have they talked about that yet? Or did they talk about that at all? Probably not, right?
No.
That's kind of deep in the weeds. That's an Al Grady question.
Yeah, there were a lot of, there was some existential questions about sports. And then there was, of course, somebody had asked Kirk if he played the video game. That was comic relief. And then, and then there was a little bit of this. And no, nobody really brought that up. But I mean, I think you look at Johnny Peskuski, who briefly entered the portal, then backed out. I think he's probably in that ballpark. You look at Zach Ortworth. I think he's been discussed a little bit more than anybody else. So they're probably in there.
I'm just interested to see how much they use the tight end and how much they go more three receiver this year. And maybe there isn't as much opportunity as there has been in the past for that number three tight end.
I think it's going to get used a lot. I mean, two tight end for sure will.
Two for sure. I'm just wondering if they rotate that third guy in much.
It's hard to say because, I mean, Iowa has run a lot of 13 personnel, three tight ends, or, last year they went four tight ends on some packages. Yeah. I mean, I was like, this is just leaning into it too much, but it's kind of funny though. In this case though, they're going to run 12, and I asked Tim Lester about that specifically in the spring, and he's like, yeah, if you know me and the way I like to run it, 12 is my favorite personnel. And when you have Luke Lachey, who's your best offensive player,
Kirk's like, you're hired.
Yeah. 12 personnel, you got you. But fullback is not going to be that used that much. And I know they have Hayden Large there, but fullback is going to be basically an extension of tight end. So I don't see that being, a whole lot on there.
Yes. And plenty of time to sort out these position battles in camp. The depth chart that we've gone over is just an outline, people. It's just an outline to get them ready for summer camp when they actually go out and compete. And there'll be injuries. There'll be guys that emerge. There'll be guys that have taken steps forward that they didn't anticipate. All of those things happen in the world of college athletics. So we'll see how things shake out. It's not long before camp will open. We'll have Media Day on August the 9th. Kids Day for all of you folks out at Kinnick will be August the 10th. Details on all of that stuff at HawkeyeSports.com. They'll give you the rundown on what Kids Day looks like, the schedule and all that. Any other Iowa takeaways from Indy that we haven't discussed, Scott?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, we talked to Beth about things like what will happen if Iowa hosts a playoff game, because it's December 20th and 21st. And, they have to go through a list. She says it's not, the questionnaire is just not like 5 questions. It's like this detail on whether or not you could host a playoff game. And that's graduation weekend. So you're talking about hotel rooms and parking and things like that. What are they capable of doing? And they feel like they've got it straightened out. But then some of the people on campus were like trying to push back, saying, you want to do this for hypothetical reasons, at this point.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, but you don't do it. And then all of a sudden it happens, like, let's say they have the early game, they get in the playoff, which is great. And they're playing at noon at Kinnick Stadium. It coincides with the graduation. You really want to do that. So I think that's something that the campus has to understand that as great as graduation is and as memorable as it is, you may have to just move it around a little bit.
I don't know how you turn down an opportunity to host, but you can.
If let's put it this way, if Iowa says we can't host this game, like let's say they're the 7 seed and Ole Miss is the 10, and that's who the matchup would be, that they would have to go to Oxford, Mississippi because of graduation. They would be the ultimate laughing stock, and it would crush them more than even a loss would. So you've got to be prepared for that. I mean, you can imagine it's like 17 degrees in Iowa City that day with snow flurries, and you've got to go play in 50-degree weather in Oxford, Mississippi. I mean, you would get laughed at for generations, not just years. So anyway, that was discussed, and then we talked about winterizing everything, and she's very much she said that they're capable of doing all of that. They're very much capable of fully funding everything they want to do. They want to compete at the highest level. I am questioning, concern, and she's uncertain about the Title IX disparity that could happen with scholarships, especially with football, fully funding football. You got to come up, if it's 20 scholarships and they decide they're going to go with 20 scholarships, then you got to find 20 or more scholarships for the females or drop scholarships for the males. And then, of course, what's that mean for baseball? Right now they're at 11-7. Are you can go up to 34 for baseball. Wrestling is 9-9. I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure wrestling will want to go higher. I'm sure women's wrestling will get more scholarships, but it's just there's a lot of questions there remains to be answered. But those are some of the things that we talked about with Beth.
Yeah, and like Scott said before we started recording, there wasn't a ton of news content out of what you guys got in Indianapolis. It was more from our old journalism days and notebook type things, like Kirk talking about the video games and some different things.
That was funny, by the way.
More human interest stuff, which is great. That's a great thing. And as they say, sometimes no news is good news.
Yeah.
Nothing happening off the field that you got to talk about, any of that stuff, nothing with the law, academics, things like that. So sometimes it's good not to have news.
Yeah. Last year we had gambling. It really covered up everything for Iowa. So that was something that we didn't have to write about, and then, so that's a good thing. I mean, a couple of observations that I made that I think were funny is, one is, Kirk is probably more relaxed now than I've seen him in years. And probably, he did talk a little bit about Brian, and he was very kind of straightforward. Like, we wish him well, and I, as a dad, I wish him great success, but I'm more focused on this and that sort of thing. And that's saying a lot. Now, we've put all the focus on Brian, but he also has 2 other sons who are coaching. James is coaching with the New York Giants. And James has a huge future in that. And then Steve's out with South Dakota. So,
Brian's not the only one, but of course Brian's the only one who coached at Iowa and was
Right.
the lightning rod. But I do think that there is some correlation there to Kirk's ease, his banter. You mentioned in the past about his poo-pooing of the depth chart. He really didn't do that this time. He was more willing to kind of talk about it and talk about the players on there. And I felt that was something that was noticeable and palpable. The one thing he got a good snort in, a Kirk Ferentz snort, was when somebody asked him if he played the video game with his players. And I was laughing thinking about it because it was so funny. And I'm like, what? You asked Kirk Ferentz about playing video games, and he's like, I haven't played a video game in 25 years, and I got my ass kicked 25 years ago. And somebody's like, well, who did you play with? Was it this game? And he's like, I don't know. I was playing with my kids down in the basement. They had like a traveling trophy. It was like a broken bowling trophy wrapped up and everything like that. So that's it's hilarious that somebody would ask him that. And then finally, Jay Higgins provides the comic relief as well. He comes in and asks Kirk a question, just kind of walks by, and then Kirk didn't notice at first. He started, two people started talking, and he's like, okay, I'll come to you in a minute. And he's like, oh, and then Jay's like, what kind of hobbies do you have off the field? And then Kirk kind of laughed, and he's like, you weren't standing there when I was saying all those nice things about you, right? And he's like, no. And he goes, well, you don't know Carl Jackson, do you? He's like, no. He's one of our assistants for a long time. And he's always said, don't say anything nice about anybody until they're dead. And, it's,
That's a warped philosophy.
I know, or until they're gone or until they're dead. He goes, because it comes back to bite you. So if you heard anything that I said nice about you, I was just joking, So, there's some playful banter, and he's always been kind of that way at times there too. But this time it didn't seem completely miserable, for him. He was willing to kind of have fun while he was there and answer legitimate questions. So I think he feels lighter, and I think not having Brian as the focus and Brian's status, I think it's probably given him a little bit more relaxation to this job. And if that's the case, then I think they're in a much better position. They're in a good position, I should say.
Yeah, no doubt. If Brian was still the offensive coordinator going into this, it would have been a completely different vibe. It would have been a lot more tense. Mm-hmm. There wouldn't have been a lot of joking around. It would have been more serious. And I think everybody's relieved, including Kirk, that he didn't want to see his son fired, but yeah. I like you said, I think it's almost like, okay, now we turn the page. There's some freshness to this. There's some, what's the word I'm looking for? Optimism.
Yeah.
I don't know if there'd have been any optimism had Brian come back.
Well, you're looking at, Rob, that the way Iowa fans responded, in season ticket sales and ticket sales. Every game is sold out.
Earlier than last year, by the way. Yeah. Last year, I couldn't find out when they officially sold out, but August 11th, the Illinois game had still not been sold out last year. So quicker this year than last year.
Yeah. And, so it went to, I just use this term joking, Gen Pop on a Thursday, and by then Iowa State had been sold out. At the end of the day, every other game but Washington had been sold out. And then on the Monday, it was Washington. What was it, earlier this week, I think. So here you are in entering the last week of July, and every game is sold out. It shows you that there is still optimism, that people are still bought in, that people like the look of this team. And when you look at the lack of attrition, it's among the lowest in the Big Ten, if not the very lowest. And then you look at the fact that, over the last, since the portal opened officially, they've been the lowest. That says a lot about this program, that people believe in, in leadership and also the player-led leadership, that people haven't jumped ship, that they've had such a horrific offense, yet they haven't been down each other's throats. I think this is, that's pretty fair and solid across the board.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be, I think, a season folks are looking forward to, and hopefully The expectations are high. We saw Cleveland.com put out its media poll earlier this week. Iowa 5th out of 18. That's pretty high expectations and kind of puts, gives us a sense of beyond Iowa that other people also consider Iowa a playoff contender, that they see what Iowa's done, what it has coming back. And even with that laughing stock of offense in the past, have them that high, they wouldn't be that high if Brian was the offensive coordinator. It's that optimism that things are going to be better on that side of the ball because shit, they can't be any worse.
Never could be worse. I mean, you could go out there and everybody tape their right arm to their body and they'd, just play with the left arm the whole time and they'd be better than they were last year. And I joke, but yeah, there is an optimism there. I voted in the Kings of the North poll, which was the same people that used to do the Cleveland poll. Now they just switched outlets, and I think there was 6th or 5th in that one too. And and there was a question whether or not they would make the playoff, and I think 9% of the people who voted said yes. And that's saying that there's a few people who think Iowa is good enough to make the tournament, and that's a big deal. It means that Iowa's in the upper third, which is where you want to be. It sounds weird to go, man, we were only voted 5th or 6th, but when you look at the Big Ten, it's not the same Big Ten that you remove Oregon and USC, then you're in the, it's like, well, you figure it would be 4th or something. And overall, there is a lot of positivity, and that's a good thing that this program has generated it. And as you said, Rob, if Brian was back, people would penalize him just simply because Brian was back. It doesn't matter if they would have been better or not. It's just like, how can you continue to do this? And it would have been a more miserable situation in Indianapolis without question.
Yep, I think everybody's turned the page and ready to move on and hoping for big things in 2024. I think we agree, at least on this podcast, that those things are attainable if things break right and the offense finds some life that hasn't been there for the last few years. All right, Scott, we can't always talk about fun stuff on here. This isn't Scott's decision. This was my decision. I talked to him beforehand about discussing this tweet from Deontay Craig. And they still called tweets. That's what I was wondering. Like when it was Twitter, they were tweets. What is it now that it's X? X's?
X, yeah. I mean, we've kind of said that it's on X and that sort of thing. So
it's just clunky. It was easier when it was Twitter. But regardless, on that platform, this is a tweet from Iowa defensive end Deontay Craig. And I want to give you guys some background for what he's talking about. This is a story that ran Wednesday of this week. The family of Sonia Massey is calling for a probe into hiring of a sheriff's deputy charged with fatally shooting the 36-year-old Black woman in her Illinois home this month, citing their concerns over records showing he'd worked at 6 law enforcement agencies in 4 years and was charged with driving under the influence twice. Sean Grayson, a 30-year-old Sangamon County Sheriff's deputy, has since been fired from the agency, was indicted by a grand jury last week on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count each of aggravated battery with a firearm and official misconduct connection with the July 6th shooting of Massey's home near Springfield. And she had called for help, thinking there may have been an intruder. And you can watch the video online and read about this. It was a bad scene, a bad situation. I think you can make parallels to George Floyd in the sense of how disturbing it was and how hard it is to explain to people why something like this still happens. And that was the genesis of Deontay Craig's tweet, which reads, this was from July 24th. So it was Wednesday, I guess, Wednesday morning at 7:50 a.m. And Craig writes, do these idiots just choose to forget that they have body cams, or are they just too arrogant enough to care? Triple question mark. I need someone to help me understand what it will take for these kinds of behaviors to change. Exclamation point. And people still wonder why we kneel and don't call for help. Shaking my head with a broken heart emoji. So I wanted to discuss this because it's uncomfortable. And I think we learned back in 2020 that sometimes uncomfortable conversations need to happen. And to me, that was Deontay Craig, a college student, asking people to explain why these things are still happening. He's at a loss. And for me, and I'm interested to get a little bit of Scott's feedback. Scott was in Indy, so he didn't follow this closely. Just a lot of it was our conversation this morning. For me, there's two things here. You can't just separate sports and life and what's going on, especially the temperature in the country right now. These guys over in that football facility and over in the Iowa athletic department, they are affected by these things. You know, these life moments, these tragedies. And this is one guy expressing that. You got to believe he's not the only one thinking about this over there in the football facility. For me, Scott, it's very encouraging that after Deontay tweeted that, not long after, Kelvin Bell tweeted, they don't care. Camera or no camera, they don't care. It's a culture, not a one-off. An abuse of power to the nth degree. It's sickening. So for me, and people may not agree with this, Scott, I think these things, especially when a player is talking about it publicly, should certainly be discussed privately within the football facility. Great sign that Kelvin Bell addressed this publicly so people know that somebody on the coaching staff has this kid's back. And that's not a commentary on the rest of the coaching staff. We talked about Kirk. He's not playing video games. He's not on Twitter. He's not going to respond to something like that. I just hope, they put together a advisory committee back in 2020. That's no longer there. I know we want and we expect and we hope for there being necessary support for student athletes and their mental health. I just hope that the program is continuing to advance in that way. Kelvin Bell's response was a good sign for that. I just hope that there's continuing discussions over this stuff so it doesn't get put under the rug and not addressed. Sorry, that was a long dissertation on my feelings on something I think is important.
Yeah, I agree, Rob, and I think that's one of the things that we want to see from, this program. There has been a lot of progress made. This is the next step in that progress because something like this happened again, just like 4 years ago, just like the woman in Louisville, and it's the same type of scenario. And how does the program, what does it do collectively? It can't just be Kelvin. It can't just be one assistant coach. And I'm not going to say anything negative because they're all kind of scattered right now. They come back next week, but it's probably something that needs to be discussed among them. And it would behoove the program to have an outlet for that to be discussed. And just to make sure that if anybody has any issues, and that they have an outlet in which to discuss that, because it is important. It's important when this has happened so often that there's no false equivalency here. This isn't, well, but this happened too. But no, I mean, when this happens to a specific group of people who've been affected this way for centuries, that this feel keeps coming back. I can't do anything. Every black man that I know has to have the discussion with their son about getting pulled over because they fear the worst. And, put your hands down, just, and so this is just another situation. And if they handle it appropriately, and over the years, there have been topics, certainly you mentioned the committee dissolving, that was certainly a polarizing decision, but the overall collective seems to believe that they've been much better. Well, this is another step in that response to make sure. And, providing the guardrails to this is important, because, whether or not we neglected our responsibility for oversight in the past, it remains to be, that's open to interpretation, because there are certain situations that we couldn't have written about in a way that would have, without us getting, struggling in society. But overall, I think it's another step, and I applaud Deontay for coming forward. And I believe he was on the trip to Birmingham. I know Kelvin was, where they went, the Big Ten took athletes again to Birmingham and to walk the Edmund Pettus Bridge and Selma and all that. So I think this is, hopefully, it's a strong indictment of what needs to change in this country.
Yeah, no question. And I think, college is so impactful, right? The idea is for us to all grow. These guys act, athletically, but also academically and socially. And this is such an impressionable part of their life that this football program has a chance to impact. And that's what I hope. I hope that these guys are growing as people too. And if you have a guy from rural Iowa and somebody from a metropolitan area that have different worldviews, there's nothing wrong. They're teammates. They're fighting. They're striving for the same goal on the field. Why not strive for the same goal off the field, which is to make society better? And if you're discussing things in the football building like this, people exchange ideas, philosophies, their backgrounds, their cultures, all of those things. I think that should be part of the experience. And I don't think it's that hard to do.
No. If people could be open-minded, Rob, and accept conversation without defense, we can advance so much quicker, because whether it's somebody like you who grew up in New Jersey and in a major metropolitan area, me who grew up on an old dirty Mississippi River town, to somebody who grew up in farm in Iowa, to somebody who grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we all shared different experiences in our life. We've done different things. And, I think the most important thing that we can always ask, and if we can put our defenses down and allow people to talk without paralysis of, why do you believe the way you do? And we can share those stories and those beliefs without the police coming out. Then I think we can take that step back, go from clenched fists to open hands. And that's hopefully, that's what this team has done so well over the years since 2020, is they've embraced one another. In the aftermath of the 2020 situation, when they went from, just a situation that was horrible for them as a team, but then within days they came together in a way that we never could have imagined, where they had open cookouts with, teams are just like workplaces, especially bigger ones. People stick to kind of who they are. There's cliques. It's based on age. It's based on position. It's based on race or background or whatever. And they really did a good job of, within a couple of days of everything, that they decided, we're going to have a cookout. Why don't you guys come over? And ultimately it led to, the 2020 team is to me maybe the greatest pure team that I've seen here at Iowa. And, it could almost get me emotional thinking about it, because of what they had to deal with in the moment, what they had to deal with COVID, what they had to deal with the season getting canceled, without school. These are young people. When we were in college, we're
drinking every night or whatever. But they had to deal with all those situations, Rob.
Yep.
Season getting canceled. They're out and about. And then they lose their first 2 games. Close, tough, hard losses. And then they came back and rattled off 6 wins. Now, they were as impressive as any team that they've ever had in that 6-week stretch. But it's not just the wins. It's how they felt with one another. And, in the locker room after the Wisconsin game, where everybody got COVID, that it was, they, to a man, they've all said that was maybe the best moment that they've ever had, just because they could share that joy with one another, and the track that they went on, and the ability for them to feel that way about one another is really profound. And so for them to go through that rough period and come out that way, you would hope that this is just another step of understanding
it's an opportunity, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you look at, for Deontay Craig to say this, you would love to have somebody else, whether a small town white person from Iowa, say that. But then also, the listening can be a 2-way street, mutually beneficial. Why do you feel the way you do? Well, I feel this way because of this. Okay, I understand you. Here's how I feel. A back and forth. It's the best possible world, I think, that they could be in. And sports brings people together unlike anything else, because shared goals, physical struggle, there's all kinds of ups and downs, but you're together. And if you're not successful. And I think that this is a real opportunity that they could show, because we are very polarized right now as a society. And hopefully that they can build a small bridge to help bring them closer together.
I look forward to talking about Deontay about this on Media Day, and maybe Kelvin Bell too, and just kind of seeing what, I don't want to say aftermath, but what the reaction was, and if they were able to discuss, if discussion sprouted from this. And my guess is it did, and that'll be a good sign, and it'll be a good story. And I also had tried to, but was unsuccessful in talking to Jason Manson. He's kind of been brought in to make sure players are heard, and topics are discussed, and everything is going well in their lives. I couldn't do that story because Scott was writing another story that would have been the antithesis of that progress. So that kind of segues into Scott discussing the Chris Doyle story. I've gotten questions on it. He's gotten questions on it. So we wanted to take the last part of this podcast, a minute or two here, just for him to talk about the Chris Doyle story he was working on and where that is now, so people can stop asking us.
Yeah. There's, at this point, it's not going to appear. I can say as a story, I'll discuss some of the things that, and I'm not going to answer the why. I'm not going to answer the why, but I can just say
background here for people, Scott, that may not know. The Athletic, Scott's employer, is also owned by the New York Times. So there are a lot of hooks, and that means editors in our business. So that's the background that Scott had to go through. He had to go through a lot of people to try to get the story published.
Yeah. And so I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not going to say anything, because, that's just doesn't work any well in any way. But I will say, here's kind of the crux of the conversation I had with Chris, and kind of relay some of the things that he said, just simply to provide some context. He was apologetic about what he felt like he did some wrong things. And I'll read a quote here from him. I was devoted to that single-minded team-first pursuit of a winning culture. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But when given the responsibility to help young people chase their dreams, that's not acceptable. Certainly when you look back on it, there are things that I would handle differently. But I think this idea that it was in a racial context or racially biased, I think that's unfair.
And I think that's probably the crux of the whole situation from his point of view. He was, very apologetic, as I said. He was also very, he had an opportunity, and he really went into detail on some of the things that he felt he did wrong. But he also believes that it wasn't racially motivated. I talked to several former players about this story. Most of them were Black. Many of them, some of them came out, some of them did not come out with statements. I wanted to avoid the players who are part of the lawsuit, because whether or not you or me or anybody felt like their stories were credible, I wanted to avoid providing that as some sort of polarizing view. So I talked to guys like Mike Daniels, to Noah Fant, to Brandon Smith, and some others. And most of them, majority of them, felt that he probably deserved another opportunity. And there's a lot of reasons why. I don't know that I could go into too many details about why they felt that there were issues related to the culture in Iowa City being primarily a white community, to sometimes the lack of being able to adjust to that community, and having a strong taskmaster made it difficult for guys who were struggling to adjust. We've gone over the Doyle situation at length over and over and over again. I don't know that I want to go into my opinions as much in this right now. And I'm not going to get into the why. I'm just not.
Yeah, that's an important part of this segment, is you're not going to know why out there publicly. So that's Scott's prerogative.
Yeah.
And he has a job and he has a livelihood. And he's obviously, I'll speak for him as a friend. He's disappointed the story didn't run, but we're not the boss.
Yeah. And I don't want it to, I'll just say this, that there was a lot of aspects that were, I would just say I would lean on the quote that I read from Chris, and that's probably as polarizing as it gets. He believes that he was wrong. I think people agree that he